Okay, good evening. So carrying on where we left off last week and looking at what's called the binding of Isaac. Some people call it the sacrifice of Isaac, but of course Isaac wasn't actually sacrificed. It's usually called the binding of Isaac. And it's one of the most difficult things really in the whole Bible to understand and make sense of. Because it's this act of Abraham which is at the foundation of Judaism, Christianity and Islam. It's not just an event that took place, it's actually one of the most important events, and probably the most important event. It's something that Jews remember in their prayers every day. And so...
They remember every day?
Yeah, every day they mention this event in their prayer. And yeah, it's very important for Muslims as well, and for Christians. Christians have a certain slanted understanding of it, connecting with Jesus. But if you put that aside and just try and look at the event in its own right. So the basic principle understanding is it's to do with restoring the foundation of faith, and that Abraham was tried to restore the foundation of faith when God asked him to make those animal sacrifices, but he didn't cut up the two doves. And so as a result of this, God said that his descendants would inhabit, would live in a foreign country, would be slaves for 400 years. So this follows on from that some years later, and again, in the principle it's understood as restoring the mistake that he made the first time round. And you might wonder, well, why should it be something much more difficult? Well, sometimes, if you do make a mistake, sometimes put it right actually is a lot more difficult, a lot more work. If you're revising for an exam and you don't do well, second time round, do you need to revise just as much as you did the first time round? Or do you need to revise more? Yeah. It's a lot more work, isn't it? Yeah. Otherwise, otherwise you send up the same results.
Some people try and get by with revising less. Doesn't usually work out.
Sometimes it's a bit like this. Anyway, so this is what happens. So we'll try and look at it from different points of view. It's a very important event. Anyway, so one day, God said to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering." So Abraham rose early in the morning. So what's that about then? Take your son, your only son Isaac. How many sons did Abraham have?
Two.
Okay, so why is Isaac then his only son?
God was forgetful.
No.
Why is Isaac his one?
Well, it says here, take your son, and maybe Abraham might have said which one? Your only son,
Oh, this one.
Isaac. So by this stage already Ishmael had been sent away into the desert. So Isaac was the only one that was there with him. Whom you love, so not one of you actually love. This is the son you love very much. The son for whom you've been waiting all these years, and offer him as a burnt offering. Abraham rose early in the morning. Is there anything surprising in that statement? Well, obviously the first part, God said, offer your son as a burnt offering. I also find Abraham's response very surprising. Do you, or not?
He gets right out of bed.
He jumps out of bed early in the morning and he takes Isaac and he sets off for Moriah, 3 days walk to sacrifice him. He doesn't think, he doesn't argue. Well, first of all, he doesn't argue with God. Yeah? Whereas when God said he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, then Abraham argued with him. So why did Abraham not argue with God about that? He argued with God about it's not fair to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So why didn't he argue with God about offering his son Isaac as a burnt offering?
I think his heart must have. I think he must have been a very heart-sick person anyway, and he must have come to self-realizing that the mistake that he made in the first offering was so serious. I believe it was offering in the eyes of God, you know. And I think this is why they didn't argue with God anyway.
Yeah, that's possible. You might have remembered, well, the first time,
Yes.
I didn't do it correctly.
I didn't do correctly.
So maybe this time I need to
Yes.
do it. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe when you defended the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, it wasn't self-serving. But this, to argue with God about this, maybe he felt it would be selfish.
Is it because last time Ryan he fell asleep, didn't he? In this particular verse. This
What?
time. Last time Ryan he fell asleep, didn't he?
Yes, you did.
This time I wanted to go early and not make the same mistake.
Maybe.
Also, another thought that came up to mind was that if Sarah could have Isaac at the age of 90, who knows? Maybe God has got an extra miracle in his locker. See,
You got up before Sarah went. You got up before.
sorry,
You got up before anybody said anything to him.
Yeah, not really early. Anyway, he must, for whatever reason, he must have felt, he must have felt in his heart of hearts, this is the right thing to do. I think if he thought it was the wrong thing to do, he wouldn't have done it. But in his heart of hearts, his conscience didn't say this is the wrong thing to do. In his heart of hearts, for whatever reason, he felt this is the right thing to do. And one has to ask the question, why did God ask Abraham to do this? Why did God test Abraham? Because usually people say, well, God doesn't need to test us because he knows what we're like. But what is the purpose of a test?
To prove loyalty. Or in this circumstance.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, I think, because man is in the good position between God and Satan, I think they often has to be clear. Either your God's side or your Satan's side, And I think maybe this is why they test, to separate, those two camps,
Okay, it's one explanation here. If you look at the Hebrew word for test and miracle are very, very similar. Okay. So if you think about a test, so if you are at your age, if you were to do the kind of test that would be given to a primary school child, maths test when they're in year 3, would you find it hard or easy?
Hard.
Easy.
Hard, I don't think so. You can add and subtract and multiply and divide.
Oh, I see. Probably, yeah. I got my
Okay, so would you find it boring, or would you really find it a great challenge and interesting to do? Boring, wouldn't it? Okay, so when you're doing a test and it stretches you, how do you feel?
You're working more harder.
Right.
You're working harder, and if you overcome anyway, you are much happier.
Now, supposing you enjoy rock climbing, and then you see this, cliff face and you wonder, can I really climb it or not? It's like a real challenge. If it was if it's something really easy, it'd be boring. Oh, I'll just do it all the time. But you saw that's a challenge. I'm not sure if I can actually do it or not. And then you do it, and you work, and you're hard, and sometimes you fall back, and you eventually get to the top. How do you feel?
Sense of great accomplishment.
Yes.
Right, and by getting to the top, are you the same kind of climber as you were when you were at the bottom?
No.
What's changed?
You feel more confident.
Yeah, you've actually, through going through this kind of test, you have changed. You've faced a barrier, challenge, and you've gone through that barrier, and you've done something you didn't think you were capable of doing. Yes? So that's why the army and things, they put people on these terrible tests, and obstacle courses and all sorts of things, and assault courses and all these things, because through going through these things and doing things you thought were impossible, you then realise actually it is possible. And then the impossible then becomes possible. You know what I mean? And so where you would have been put off by something in the past, then you feel, well actually now I know I can do it. You feel a greater sense of confidence. And so in that sense, that's why a test is like a miracle in that way. So, as I said, a miracle is when God breaks out of his standard pattern of natural law and demonstrates unlimited powers, and a test is when God invites you to do the same. So that's why when a person passes a test, it causes a miracle to happen. And so when we take a test, then we're breaking through a barrier. And so some of the tests is like having to break through an old habit. You know, we're used to doing things a certain way, and then you find you have to do things in a different way, and you don't want to. It's really difficult to change and break through this habit. And once you've broken through it, then you feel like you become a different person. Yeah, that's why people do conditions. You know, fasting conditions or cold shower. You know, you think, well, how can I possibly live for 7 days without eating? Yeah, but then you try and you do it. Yeah, and then you realise actually this has broken that kind of barrier. So Abraham himself, he passed many tests. Yeah. I mean, the Bible says he passed 9 tests. I don't know what they all are, but I've told you some of them. For example, that time when he was challenged over Nimrod. Remember?
No.
You know, and these kind of there's several tests he passed when he was a child. What was he going to do at the risk of his life? He passed that test, that challenge, and many other tests he passed. Anyway, this is, you could say, is the toughest, the hardest test. And you know, when God told him he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, that was a test. You know, Abraham felt it was wrong, but what was he going to do? Was he going to just keep quiet? Oh, I can't argue with God. You know what I mean? When God told Abraham he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, God was actually testing Abraham. He wanted Abraham to respond in the way he did respond, and to argue with him. To do that, you can imagine how Abraham must have had to pluck up his courage to go and challenge and confront God. Yeah? But because by doing that, he went through a test and he passed that test. This is often seen as another kind of test. But this kind of test is completely different to all the other kinds of tests, you could say, because, you know, throwing yourself into a fiery furnace instead of worshipping Nimrod, you know, well, you made a statement, you know, about yourself. And the same with many of the other tests, you know, proclaiming about God and all these things. But this particular test, sacrifice of Isaac, seemed to be contrary to everything that he believed. It was, you know, it was just against everything he believed. So why do you think he did it? Well, one explanation here is that when Abraham bound Isaac on the altar, it wasn't in the service of any calling or cause. In fact, it ran against everything he believed and taught. It was against everything for which he sacrificed his life up until then. It was against everything God had told him. He could see no reason, no purpose for this act. And so you could say everything in him cried out against it. But why did he do it? One way is just to say, well, in his heart of hearts, he felt it was the right thing to do. God told him to do it. So, in that sense, he was saying, you could say that the core of Abraham's faith was that lies not in the self, but in a commitment to the Creator. It's kind of absolutely following God, whatever God says. But what do you think about that? Kierkegaard describes something like sort of, you know, when God tells you to do something, even if it looks like it's unethical, you should still do it. It's called a suspension of ethics or something. I can't remember what it's called now. Do you think that's a good thing? Is it something?
No, because in other passages, he even says to Abraham, go before me and be blameless.
Yeah.
So he's always told Abraham to follow his conscience.
Yes. And so somehow doing this wasn't against his conscience, but was he just doing it because God told him to do it? That's one argument. And that sort of trumps everything in that sense. Absolute obedience trumps all ethics and morality. But there again, you know, I don't think so. Anyway, the angel intervened and said, don't do it. And so another way of making sense of it is like this. The Bible is a critique of ancient pagan society. Yeah, for example, the first commandment was You should have no other gods before me. Make no idols. So the ancient world was polytheistic. There are many gods. They worship idols, and they engage in all kinds of weird sexual practices and all these kind of things. And so the Bible is in many ways a critique of contemporary society as it was then. And the ancient family is very interesting in its structure. So the ancient family, the domestic religion, the religion was a family religion, a domestic religion, and it's based on ancestor worship, making the ancestors happy. And then one of the things that was involved in ancient times was child sacrifice. This was quite common throughout the ancient world. It was very common in many societies, before Christianity arrived, child sacrifice. And so in this kind of ancient society, the head of the family had absolute authority. The father of the family had the power of life and death over his wife and children. And this was not unusual. So for example, at the time of Jesus, the king was Herod the Great. He put to death his wife and several of his children, I think. Sorry?
Why?
Well, because he might have suspected one of them of disloyalty or this or that. But the point isn't that he put them to death. The point is he had the right to do that. As a head of the family, he had the right to put his children to death or to put his wife to death, and that was normal in the ancient world. This is an incredibly patriarchal kind of society.
So it was common. If you heard about it, in a pagan society, it wouldn't really shock you.
Well, it might shock you, but it wasn't against the law. That's the point. And you get these echoes of this, right up until England in the 19th century, where a woman who got married, all the property she had automatically was transferred to the husband. That's like an echo of this thousands of years later. This kind of woman has no rights. The father is the head of the family, has absolute authority, and the wife then was the property so the wife was treated as property. She was the property of her husband, and because she was his property, he could do with her whatever he wanted. He could sell her into slavery. He could do whatever he wanted with his children. Whatever he wanted. That was the way it was in the ancient world. And this authority was inherited by the firstborn son. So after the father died, then the firstborn son became the head of the family, and if he wanted to, he could also put his mother to death. If she annoyed him excessively. I mean, it's shocking, but that's just, I'm not saying it went on all the time. What I'm saying is that was how the authority was. The legal authority was in the family, and the head of the family had this absolute authority. And you get similar sort of things in the Orient Confucian society. You get the same similar sort of thing in India until recently, when her husband died, then his wife was expected to throw herself onto the funeral pyre and get burnt, because that was what was expected, the social expectation. Again, that was until quite recently. All kinds of really odd stuff went on in the ancient world. You still get echoes of these kind of practices, all over the place. And it's shocking, but that's the way it was. So the biblical tradition, and it completely rejected this, and completely rejected child sacrifice. And so the biblical world, it said that worship of God of all humanity. In other words, the biblical world rejected ancestor worship. When you were, why does the biblical world reject ancestor worship? When you're worshipping your ancestors, what are the consequences of this?
You're worshipping
What are the social consequences of ancestor worship?
You're replacing them with God.
Sorry?
You're replacing them with God.
Yeah, but if there's ancestor worship, then you worship your ancestors, okay? Then in the world in which you're living in, to whom do you feel connected? People who have the same ancestors as you, okay? And then how will you treat people who don't have the same ancestors as you?
Like the
Sorry?
enemy.
Hmm?
The enemy.
Well, yeah, because they don't worship the same ancestors that you worship. You know, everybody worships the same ancestors in this particular group. You're all worshipping the same ancestors, but then there's a group over here. They have different ancestors, so they're other. You know what I mean? And so you have different kinds of sense of ethical, moral obligations to them. Okay, whereas the biblical world is there's one God, and God is the parent of all humanity. Yes? Instead of worshipping your ancestors who are only your direct ancestors, and you know, which means there's a big gap between you and somebody from another country because they've got different ancestors than you've got. There's one God for all humanity, which means every single human being is your brother or sister. Every single human being is a relative of yours because everyone shares the same God. Yes? So that was shocking. Yeah? Because in the ancient world, every people had their own gods. The Egyptians had their own gods, every family had its own gods, etc., etc., etc. And this is what, you know, was a big problem. Whereas the God of Abraham said, no, there's one God, I created the universe, and I'm the God of every human being, in that sense. And this then leads to radical equality. Because if there's one God for every human being, it means in front of God, everybody is the same, has the same value. Again, a completely radical understanding from the ancient world. Whereas you're worshipping a different God, then you don't, you know, our God protects us, and you have your God that protects you. And it's, you know, it's something easy. I mean, in the modern world, you end up with nationalism. And it's like, you know, you've got the national God, nationalism. Whereas the biblical God of the Bible is trying to challenge that narrowness and saying, actually, there's one God for all humanity. They don't worship ancestors. The second thing is that it challenges the patriarchism, the patriarchal society, because it says in the commandment, you shall worship. It says you shall honour your father and your mother. Okay, again, totally unique in the ancient world. The equality of men and women means that father and mother within the family have equal authority. And this goes all the way back to Genesis 1, of course. And so this means then that every person then is a child of God. Okay? Every human. So in that sense, it's a different understanding of parents. So in the ancient world, the head of the family owned his wife and owned his children. Okay? In the biblical world, what God is trying to do is teach people, actually, your children do not belong to you. They belong to me. Which means you do not have the right to put your wife to death because she doesn't belong to you. She is my daughter, she belongs to me. You do not have the right to put your sons and daughters to death because your sons and daughters, they do not belong to you, they belong to me. Okay? So once that is established, that means the understanding here is parents are not owners, they don't own their children, they're guardians. Yes? And it says in the principle, God gave Adam and Eve the second blessing, that through having children, we can understand God's love for us. Yeah? So, you know, through having children, then we can inherit God's love. And so Father said, when you go into the spiritual world, your parents aren't your parents anymore. They're like everyone's an adult in the spiritual world. We're all brothers and sisters in the spiritual world, and it's more like a feeling of older and younger brother and sister, that's all. Not, oh, these are my parents, you know, like a little child, that relation to parents like that. But everyone grows up, and we all become parents. We all go through the experiences that our own parents have been through, this, that, and the other. So in that sense, we're all on the same level. In front of God, everyone's on the same level. Yeah. So this is the idea that with ancestor worship, you've got this, you know, you've got this hierarchy of ancestors into the next world. Yeah. The biblical tradition, actually, in the next world, it's flat. There's one God, and you know, everyone is a son or daughter of God. And that's why Father himself said, you know, that we don't say God is our grandfather. We say God is our Father. Yeah? Because God is a parent to all human beings, not the grandparents. There's a parent. And so parents then are guardians, not owners. And so from this binding of Isaac, so the biblical understanding then is the individual then has divine, unique and eternal value. So this is the way God wants it. This is the pattern God wants to establish. Worship God, yeah, one God for all human beings, which means everyone's equal irrespective of their race or their colour or anything else. Father and mother have equal authority because they reflect both dimension aspects of the divine nature. Each person is a child of God, and so as a result of this, every individual has divine, unique and eternal value, and parents are not allowed to mistreat their children. Yeah? And so this is the sort of impetus between child rights and all these sorts of things. Whereas you don't need to go back very long, 100, don't even have to go back 100 years, and parents, fathers could do all sorts of things with their children, and they wouldn't be prosecuted. They'd beat their children, they'd do this, this and this and this and this, and it wasn't against the law, because the father, as the head of the family, could do that in England and in other countries. It's only recently that these restrictions upon the way that parents can treat their children have become established in law. Before that they weren't. No?
You were allowed to hit your children.
Sorry?
You were allowed to hit your children.
Well, yeah, you could beat your children as much as you want. When I was a child, my father wanted to, he could beat me as much as he wanted, as long as he didn't actually kill me. Yes. And children were beaten, seriously beaten, and the policeman wouldn't step in. Wives were beaten, domestic abuse, and the police wouldn't step in. It was, we don't want to get involved in this, unless the person actually gets killed. You know what I mean? So that was the way it was. This is like a sort of hangover from that ancient world understanding, which is very different to the biblical view and the pattern that God wanted to establish. 4,000 years ago, God wanted to establish this. And so what God is doing with Abraham then, God says to Abraham, offer your son as a burnt offering. So Abraham could have said, excuse me, he's my son, I'm not yours, I'm not going to do it. He belongs to me. You know what I mean? But God was saying to Abraham, no, Abraham, he's my son. Yes? I have the authority to ask you to do this. Yeah, and you should let go and realize he's my son before he's your son. Okay? So this means then, God was teaching Abraham, Isaac doesn't belong to you, he's not your property. He belongs to God. Of course, God didn't want Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So the whole point is, it was not that Abraham sacrificed Isaac, because he didn't. God doesn't want us to sacrifice our children. And that's the other lesson from this story, is that God said to Abraham, I don't want you to do it. Because God doesn't want us to sacrifice our children. God wants us to take care of our children, look after our children. Okay, does that make sense? And so you get different things here. When Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, what did Isaac do?
He shows complete obedience.
Well, the fact is, Isaac went along with it, didn't he? Did Abraham force Isaac to do it?
No.
So what's the lesson you can learn from this?
I think trust his dad.
Trust.
Well, that's one lesson. What's the lesson the other way around?
You got fooled.
Hmm?
You got fooled.
No. What's the lesson the other way around? Isaac knew what was going to happen. Okay? And he's willing to go along with it. Okay, so what's the lesson there? If you want to do something, sacrifice your children, you have to ask them. They have to willingly participate. So the same applies if you want to become a missionary and go to another country and leave your parent, your wife and your children. You need to, before you do that, what do you need to do?
Ask permission.
Yes, you have to ask your wife or husband, can I have permission to go abroad and do this missionary work or do this or this or this? And ask the children. And if the children don't say yes, then what should you do? Stay at home.
Reconsider.
Sorry? You have to stay because for you to go, or for someone to go as a missionary for months or years, it means that the family is going to be sacrificed in that sense. They're not going to have you around, the love, the support, maybe the financial difficulties, and all sorts of different things. Okay, so in order for them to go through that, actually you have to get their permission and their support, such that they want to say yes. Please go and do this. Yeah. So that's why it's really important. So there's honestly speaking, this is a mistake in our, the Unification Church. We didn't do that. We made a big, serious mistake here. Parents, when they wanted to go onto a mission somewhere, they didn't ask their spouse and their children for permission to do it. And such that they got to the point where the spouse and children said, yeah, please go. We want you to go. We'll be proud of you if you go. Yes? We support you and encourage you. Yeah? You know what I mean? That's the way. That's the other lesson from that point of view. People usually look at it from Isaac was very faithful and trusting Abraham. Which is true. Which means you can tell from that the quality of Abraham's character, such that Isaac trusted him that much. So you think, well, one has to become like that, such that one's children are willing to trust one that much. That's the first thing, Abraham's character. But the other thing is, Abraham, obviously didn't push Isaac, he didn't force him. It was obviously, that's the other lesson there. You need to get that kind of permission as well. That makes sense? And so, personally I think often in the Unification Church this story has been misused. Your leaders will say, oh, you have to sacrifice Isaac and do something you don't want to do, or this, that, or the other. But actually the whole point is God told Abraham, don't sacrifice Isaac. And so sadly, a lot of people sacrifice all kinds of things, their education and this, that and the other. And it never comes back. Yeah? And that was a mistake. So I think myself, sometimes in the past, I don't know about today, but leaders in our church, then they use this story to try and control people, manipulate them in the wrong way. I think that's terrible. We should never use stories in that way. Because first of all, that's not the lesson this story teaches. This lesson doesn't teach those lessons. It teaches actually the complete opposite of that. That make sense? So this is the core of this story, really. That was what God was wanting to teach. That. Anyway, as I said, Isaac then, he was willing to go along with this, and so he restored the mistake that Ham made. When Ham, felt ashamed of Noah, and then the angel came and said to Abraham, the angel of the Lord said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. In other words, you've recognized that your son Isaac, first of all, he belongs to me before he belongs to you. So Isaac then, he practiced absolute love, absolute faith, absolute obedience as well. And so this understanding then of absolute love, faith, and obedience, this was a pattern that was established by Abraham. So Abraham absolutely loved the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. At the risk of his life, he was willing to argue with God to save the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He loved his enemies. Yeah? Absolute love for his enemies. He had absolute faith in God and principle, and he absolutely obeyed his conscience. He did what he thought and knew was the right thing to do. And so Abraham and Isaac then, together they offered a ram as a sacrifice. In that sense, then Isaac was able to inherit the foundation of faith from Abraham in a way that Ham wasn't able to from Isaac. Any questions?
Do you think it was also connected with the fact that Hagar and Ishmael had been sent away? Because it's pretty major. It seems like if you had a family the woman who fathered your first child left with that child. like a family breaking up.
Yeah, well, he didn't want Hagar and Ishmael to go.
Yeah.
That was what Sarah wanted, and
So,
she practically understood, could see the possibility then of Ishmael killing Isaac, sort of Cain and Abel, replay. So she wanted to avoid that, so she sent Hagar and Ishmael away. But the principle understanding, if Isaac had restored the offering, if Abraham had restored the foundation of faith the first time round with the animal sacrifices, then there would have been some kind of spiritual foundation and presence there, God's grace, for Ishmael and Isaac to make the foundation of substance together. But because Abraham didn't make the foundation of faith, there wasn't this kind of spiritual foundation or grace to enable Ishmael and Isaac to make the foundation of substance to overcome the fallen nature.
yeah.
And I think Sarah was aware of that. That's why she wanted Hagar and Ishmael to go away. But, even though Abraham did this final test successfully, still his descendants all went into Egypt for 400 years. So that wasn't cancelled. He restored the foundation of faith, but he didn't cancel the mistake that he'd made. Satan still was able to claim that and do what he wanted.
If he hadn't restored it, it might have been more than 400 years. Or,
I don't know. If he hadn't gone through the binding of Isaac,
yeah.
well, in that sense, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe God would have had to start all over again, finding somebody else. Or maybe Isaac would have had to go through a similar kind of situation and try to do something like that. I don't know. It's not, I said it's something Abraham did, and it sort of brought him onto this kind of level, broke this kind of barrier. He was a pioneer of self-sacrifice. He sacrificed himself, he sacrificed his ideals, he sacrificed everything he believed, and he sacrificed his future, his son Isaac. He sacrificed everything. It's like equivalent to just killing himself, really.
Yeah.
It's even worse in that sense, because he's still remaining alive. But he's willing to make that kind of total commitment to what he believed was right. And that's the thing, I think he felt in his heart of hearts, he believed this is, I have to do this. And I think he didn't understand why he had to do it, any more than Isaac would have understood why it was necessary. Isaac probably thought, well, maybe it's necessary for something, but I don't understand why. And sometimes we do things, we don't know the meaning of it at the time, but later on we look back and we realise actually it had meaning and significance. But at the time we just feel, this is something I have to do. I don't know why I have to do it, but I just have to do this. Maybe all sorts of things. Maybe you see somebody in the street, you feel, I just have to go up and speak to this person. I don't know why. And then you speak to this person and you go away, but that may even change that person's life. It might have been a person who wanted to kill themselves, and you just go up and speak to them. And because of that, a lot's changed. But you don't know why. You just have to do it. You know what I mean? And I think it's that kind of situation. Sometimes, we want to know all the reasons why. Sometimes, it's just necessary to do something in that sense. We just feel, I have to do this. I don't know why, but this is the right thing to do. And I think that's what it was with Abraham. And if Abraham hadn't done that, I think, somebody would have had to do that. Isaac would have had to do that, or somebody would have had to do that. And it's not an unusual thing. You find the crucifixion was a foundation for Christianity. You look at Sikhism. That was also based on something very similar. You know the story that Guru Gobind Singh, the last guru, the last living guru, the last human guru. So he realised that certain circumstances with the development of Sikhism, that lots of Sikhs weren't clear about their identity. So he called at the festival of Varanasi. They're all there to celebrate this holy day. And then one day he came out of his tent during this festival with a large sword in his hand. And he said, I need a head. And people thought, what do you mean you need a head? I need someone who's willing to offer me their head. And people were kind of, what's this about? Yeah, one young man, he went and said, okay, Guru Gobind Singh, I offer you my head. So they went into the tent, and there was this loud swishing sound, and the Guru came out with a sword and blood dripping from the sword. And do you know what he said? I need another head. So you can imagine, people starting to get a bit scared, what's all this about? And then another young man came forward and went into the tent with a large squish, and he came out with even more blood dripping from his sword. People started to leave, some people started to leave, some people stayed. In the end, I think it was 5 young men went into the tent. And by that time, people were getting pretty scared of what's going on here. And then when he went in with the fifth one, the large squish, and then he came out. And he came out with all 5 young men, and they're all dressed in the Sikh turban, and with the shorts on, and the kara around and the knife, and the members of the Khalsa. And that was the beginnings of the Sikh Khalsa. These are the Sikhs who come. So there are lots of Sikhs, and then members of the Khalsa. People take a sort of next stage up in terms of level of commitment. Within the Catholic, it's like getting confirmed or something, or maybe becoming a monk or something older.
So what did they cut?
Sorry?
The tent? Is it just a memorable?
Nobody knows. The tradition is he cut their heads off, but they came out alive.
Ah.
Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows. But anyway, the point is there was that ask and that willingness,
Sacrifice.
but actually nobody was sacrificed. That's the point. It was just, and so, people then sometimes misunderstand this. Sometimes you watch television and you see mothers, from a Muslim extremist groups, hoping that they're being proud of their children becoming suicide bombers and martyrs, longing for, you know what I mean? And you have to think, is that right? No, that's totally wrong. God said, do not sacrifice your children. This is one of the dominant themes in the Old Testament from the prophets. Do not sacrifice your children. But when people misinterpret the story, and they can say, oh, God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, that's a noble thing to do. We're going to sacrifice our children and be proud if they become suicide bombers. And you can watch things, from Palestinian, schools and things, how children there are brought up to, think of themselves like this and to want to become like that. And
Is this Hamas?
Hamas, all the dreadful stuff that's going on there. It's a complete distortion of this story, complete misunderstanding of this story. God does not want people to sacrifice their children. It's totally wrong. For parents to do this, and sometimes if they do that, then they get a material reward, and they get money if they're willing to do that. It's sick. It's a pathological form of religion. It's kind of Satan invaded that. It's gone back to the pagan, ancient world. Child sacrifice. It's wrong. But as I said, goes on. You see it in the Middle East. It's not unusual. It's really it's a sick kind of religion. People take these stories and they misuse them for their own political purposes.
How is the situation with Lot's family distinguished from that? Because when, as you mentioned last week, where either Lot sends his guests out and they are killed or everyone is killed.
Yeah, so that's following a different rule. That's the rule of hospitality. And that if you haven't got enough food to go around and you feed your guests, you know, if you've got guests, you give them the best bedroom, and you know, this, and that's just a rule of hospitality taken to the extreme in that sense, where you have this choice between, you know, saving the life of your family, or saving, or you know, by handing over your guests, or everybody perishing. Well, you know, it's in that sense it's more ethical, more moral to sacrifice your own children in that sense than to sacrifice your guests. So it's like loving your enemy. But I think that's a very different kind of moral principle.
Yeah.
Because that was just a terrible situation to find yourself in. And sadly, you know, sometimes, you know, people find themselves in these different situations. They have to make a choice, make a decision. A normal thing to do is you know, one thing, but actually, you know, very difficult. Not easy. You know, Aung San Suu Kyi, what's her name? In Burma. What's that name of that Burmese dissident survivor?
Aung San Suu Kyi.
That's right. So she was in a similar situation. You know, she was in Burma. She came here. Her father was, you know, had been killed, and then she came here. She went to university. She got married to an Englishman, had a family, and then she felt she had to go back there. You know, as a dissident, to try to undermine the regime and everything. But it was really complicated because she didn't see her husband or her children. And so it's very complicated for her children. You know, she is a hero for the world, but the children have got all kinds of mixed feelings about it. You know what I mean? Because they didn't see her for years, and then after their dad died, they still didn't see her because she stayed there. Really complicated feelings and emotions that they have to process. So that's why, you know, Abraham, you need to get your children's permission, otherwise they end up with all kinds of stuff going on. And sometimes, you know, I look at father's family and wonder, well, before father went out fishing, did he get his family's permission to do it all the time? Or did he just go and do it because he felt it was the right thing to do and everything? Or did he actually say to mother and the kids, is it okay if I go out fishing again and I'm not home again? You know what I mean? And, you know, so I just wonder sometimes if that's why there's all kinds of complicated things going on there as well. I think it's, you know, again, I think maybe it's the lessons that should have been drawn from the story actually weren't drawn, and the wrong lessons were drawn, that it's good to sacrifice for children, but actually that's the opposite to what the moral of this story is. We're going to get lots of hate mail after this. All the comments I'm making. So, should we go on to the foundation assumptions, or should we leave this till next week? It's another hour in itself.
Okay.
I have to go to it, sorry.
Sorry?
I have to go to it, sorry, I need to go.
Maybe we can have it there. Yeah.
Let's say it's about an hour lecture anyway, so
Yeah. We'll do
better leave it next week.
That clock's slow, by the way.
Yes,
It's
yes.
quarter past now.
Yeah.
It's taken us past 9, so you should be able to finish around 8:30 anyway. So.
Yes.
Yeah, otherwise, you know, it means having a break.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I think about the stories, it's only in the last year or so that I've worked through this.
Because I've never heard this before, so I was wondering.
Right.
I don't remember this.
No, I didn't. It's only the last year. I've been wrestling with this story for 40 years.
Yeah.
You know, to say it's just restoring the mistake of not sacrificing animals, let's move on, is kind of not dealing with the real issues,
Yeah.
the complexity of the... How do you think Isaac felt, you know, years later? You know, my dad was willing to do that to me. Complicated, isn't it? You know, if you found that your dad was willing to sacrifice you,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, well,
What if?
what if, yes.
Because when you have an argument with your close family and loved ones, and these major events can come up, and
Yeah,
if there's any blame left over or
Yeah.
resentment,
absolutely.
they that's the last dagger that you throw. Like, oh, you were going to do this and
That's
that,
right. Yeah,
even though it's apparently forgiven. So
yeah.
to really have let it go and really have accepted it is
So you can see
a
that.
testament to the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, they had to go through all kinds of stuff inside. Both of them had to go through all kinds of stuff to deal with all their feelings, emotions, and thoughts and everything, and process it all, and break down these incredible barriers. And it's like I said, it's like a miracle, and moving on to a very different level in terms of their self-understanding, a relationship with God, incredible. Yeah, I can imagine, when it says they made the offering together, you can imagine how close they must have felt to each other when they felt actually both passed this test. We both did something we thought was impossible. You can imagine how nervous they must have been, but then you went through it, and suddenly you have this incredible release of all this energy and these nerves, and incredible sense of ecstasy and joy, because you've been able to pass through this incredible test together. I can just imagine, but I said it's only, when I look back at my own life, I can say, many times I just thought, oh, it's God's will, I've got to go and do this. And, it's like, without actually getting the support, that one really ought to get. And I realised it's the same with my parents, when I joined the unis. They didn't stop me. But, there again, I should have really asked for their support, to spend the time, till they said, we understand, you can go, we're happy to support you. Which anyway, they did. But I know a lot of people, they just, oh, God wants me to do this, therefore you're not important anymore, etc. A lot of pain was caused. A lot of bridges were burned, a lot of pain was caused, which shouldn't have been done. I think again, it's often because of this kind of story. You have to sacrifice your Isaac. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the way it is. You have to come to an agreement with Isaac and get his permission before you can go ahead and do this.
Because if you destroy one thing to build another, you're not creating anything extra, because you've lost a whole relationship.
Yeah, you're just making something that you will have to restore one day in the future. So you're actually,
Making more work.
a lot more work.
You're not recreating, you're destroying something just to recreate it. And
Well, to try to recreate it along in the future, which, if you got it right then, it would have been relatively easy. But then sometimes, 10, 20 years later, Father said, go and do hometown. And sometimes people went home and the parents weren't interested. And to try to revive that relationship after neglecting parents for 20 years. For a lot of people, it never happened. And it's really sad, because to do that, it's like a greater indemnity. You have to do far more than you'd have had to do the first time around. Really complicated. As I said, I think this is a story which we've misunderstood and misused. Okay. Switch it off, I guess.
Okay.